The battlefield stretched before her like a painting rendered in blood and mud. Elara Ashford stood at the edge of the human military encampment, her mind reaching out across the valley where smoke still rose from morning skirmishes. 23 years old, and she had seen more war than most soldiers twice her age. The autumn wind carried the scent of gunpowder and something darker, something that never quite washed out of your clothes or your memory. She closed her eyes and let the voices flood in. The enemy officer they had captured an hour ago sat bound in the interrogation tent 50 paces behind her. His surface thoughts screamed defiance and training, years of conditioning designed to resist conventional questioning. But conventional was not what Elara brought to this fight. She pushed past the layers of military doctrine and practiced resistance, diving deeper into the raw currents of his consciousness. There, a supply route, coordinates for the next attack, names of commanders who thought themselves safely hidden behind enemy lines. Colonel William Reeves emerged from the command tent, his weathered face creased with the kind of exhaustion that came from leading men who trusted you to bring them home. He was 62, a career soldier who had fought in conflicts most people had already forgotten. His thoughts touched her mind with their usual mixture of gratitude and unease. Best intelligence asset we have got. Shame she is not one of us. Shame about what she is. Elara opened her eyes and turned to face him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the encampment, illuminating the weariness etched into every soldier's face. These men had accepted her presence over the past 3 years because she kept them alive. Results mattered more than comfort when survival hung in the balance. The colonel stopped beside her, his gaze following hers across the valley. Neither spoke for a long moment. Words were often unnecessary when you could read minds, but Elara had learned to respect the human need for verbal confirmation. Some truths demanded to be spoken aloud. "Your prisoner has given me everything," she said quietly. "The supply convoy will use the Eastern Ridge Road tomorrow at dawn. 3 trucks, minimal escort. They believe we do not know about the mountain pass." The colonel's relief washed over her before he even smiled. "Outstanding work, Ashford." His hand moved as if to clap her shoulder, then hesitated. Old habit. Most people learned quickly not to touch a telepath without warning. The contact made mental noise harder to filter, turned background whispers into shouts. She had been working with human forces for 3 years now. 3 years since her exile from the wolf pack that should have been her home, her family, her future. The memory still carried teeth. Standing before the pack elders at 16 years old, her father's face carved from stone as he pronounced the sentence. Exile. For the crime of being born different, for possessing a gift that made others uncomfortable, that invaded the sacred privacy of their thoughts. Her father's mind had been the worst part. She had read his thoughts that terrible day, seen the conflict tearing him apart. Better exile than worse. Better she runs far and lives quiet than becomes weapon for pack politics, than watches her own people turn her into thing they fear and hate. It had been mercy disguised as cruelty. She understood that now. 7 years of distance had granted perspective, even if it could not ease the ache. The message arrived during evening mess. A young private approached with unusual hesitance, his thoughts broadcasting anxiety before he even spoke. "Ma'am, coded transmission for you, priority level." Elara took the sealed envelope, noting the wax insignia she had not seen in years. Her hands remained steady as she broke the seal, but something cold settled in her chest. The message was brief, encoded in a cipher only 2 people alive would recognize. Her uncle, Duke Harrington, her mother's older brother, and the only family member who had maintained contact after her exile. "Thornwood Bridge, dawn, assassination. They are coming for our bloodline. Trust no one." She read it 3 times, committing every word to memory before feeding the paper to the nearest campfire. The flames consumed the evidence, but the warning burned itself into her thoughts. Duke Harrington was not given to dramatics or false alarms. If he sent warning of assassination, the threat was real and immediate. Elara moved through the evening camp with practiced efficiency, gathering her meager possessions and mentally cataloging what she would need. The soldiers around her noticed her preparation, but did not question it. She had always been half-ghost to them, present but never quite permanent, useful but never quite trusted. 3 years of service, and she remained the outsider who could not be allowed too close to anything that mattered. Colonel Reeves found her as she finished securing her pack. His thoughts arrived before his words, concern wrapped in military practicality. "You are leaving." Ooh. It was not a question. She met his gaze directly, something she rarely did. "Family emergency, Colonel. I need to move quickly." He studied her for a long moment, and she caught the edges of his calculation. She had value, but she was not his soldier, not truly. Their arrangement had always been temporary, a contract between convenience and necessity. After a moment, he nodded. "You have earned your leave 10 times over, Ashford. But if you need backup, you send word." The offer surprised her. She let her gratitude show in her expression, rather than speaking it. Some emotions carried more weight in silence. Then she turned and walked into the gathering darkness beyond the camp perimeter. The forest embraced her like an old friend. 7 years of wandering had taught her to navigate by starlight and instinct. Her wolf was weak, barely present, but even that faint connection to her nature allowed her to move through the wilderness with confidence. She ran through the night, pushing her human body to its limits, covering miles, while her mind reached ahead, searching for the thoughts of those who might wish her harm. Thornwood Bridge lay 2 days north by human travel. She could make it in 1 if she did not stop, if she pushed past exhaustion and into that state where body and will became singular purpose. Her uncle's message echoed through her thoughts with every footfall. "They are coming for our bloodline." Who was they, and why now after 7 years of relative peace? The answer came to her 12 hours into her run when she first felt them. 3 minds, sharp and focused, moving with military precision through the forest ahead. Elara slowed her pace, dropping into a crouch behind a fallen oak. She extended her telepathic sense carefully, touching the edges of their consciousness without alerting them to her presence. Mercenaries, professional soldiers with wolf blood running through their veins, but loyalty pledged to coin rather than pack. Their thoughts were disciplined, but not impenetrable. She sifted through surface memories and immediate intentions, piecing together the picture. The target is Duke Harrington, Thornwood Bridge at dawn. Make it look like accident or bandit attack. No witnesses. Payment on confirmation. The woman, though, if she shows, that changes everything. Alive, if possible. They will pay triple for the telepath. Elara's blood turned cold. This was not simple assassination. This was a trap within a trap. Someone had known her uncle would warn her. Someone had anticipated her response. They wanted her to come running to save family, wanted her vulnerable and isolated when they struck. She remained motionless, barely breathing, as the 3 mercenaries passed within 20 paces of her position. Their thoughts continued to spill details. The assassination was set for dawn, but they had been deployed early to sweep for complications, to sweep for her. Once they passed beyond comfortable telepathic range, Elara rose and changed direction. Not toward Thornwood Bridge, but parallel to it. If this was a trap, she would not walk blindly into it, but she would not abandon her uncle either. Strategy. That was what 3 years of working with military minds had taught her. Read the battlefield. Understand your enemy's position. Force them to fight on ground of your choosing, not theirs. And she knew exactly whose ground offered the best advantage. The Royal Patrol routes were predictable if you understood the pattern. King Magnus Ironhart maintained security throughout his territories with disciplined regularity. His forces swept the major roads and border regions on schedules that varied just enough to prevent ambush, but not so much that they became impossible to predict. Elara had made a study of it during her time working near his kingdom's edges. Information was survival when you had no pack, no home, no one to call for aid. She intercepted the patrol 3 hours before dawn, 20 mounted soldiers in formation, their armor bearing the wolf and mountain crest of the Northern Crown. They spotted her emerging from the tree line and immediately shifted to combat readiness. Weapons did not quite draw, but hands moved to hilts, thoughts sharpened with suspicion and training. The captain was a man named Marcus, 40 years old with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow and instincts honed by 2 decades of service. His thoughts catalogued her appearance with professional efficiency. Lone woman, armed but not aggressive, exhausted, wolf blood but not pack-marked, something familiar about her but cannot place it. Elara raised her hands slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. "I need to speak with your king. I have intelligence regarding coordinated attacks across 4 territories. The question is whether you have authority to hear it or whether I wait for someone who does." The words were calculated. Challenge their authority just enough to provoke decision, but not enough to create genuine offense. Make them react rather than deliberate. Time was a luxury she could not afford. Captain Marcus's thoughts flickered through options and protocols. His hand remained on his sword hilt. You will state your business here. If your information has merit, it will reach the appropriate ears. Elara met his gaze directly and spoke words that would either save her uncle or condemn them both. 6 high-ranking nobles are marked for assassination within 3 days. Duke Harrington at Thornwood Bridge at dawn this morning is merely the first. The attacks are coordinated across your territories and 2 neighboring kingdoms. This is not bandit activity or random violence. This is the opening move of something larger. The captain's thoughts crystallized with decision. Bind her hands. We take her to the fortress. If she speaks truth, the king will want to hear directly. If she lies, he will want to question her personally. Soldiers moved to flank her, and Elara allowed them to secure her wrists with rope. Not silver, thank the old gods, just hemp that chafed but did not burn. They placed her on a spare horse, and the patrol turned toward the fortress that dominated the northern horizon. As they rode, Elara reached out with her telepathy, searching for her uncle's mind across the miles. The distance was great, nearly at the edge of her range, but she found him, still alive, still moving. He had received enough warning to avoid the dawn meeting at the bridge. Relief flooded through her chest, but the mercenaries would adapt. They would hunt, and her uncle was alone. The fortress rose from the landscape like a monument to permanence. Gray stone walls thick enough to withstand siege engines. Towers that watched the surrounding valleys with unblinking attention. This was not the seat of some minor lord playing at power. This was the heart of a kingdom forged through blood and defended through strength. They led her through gates that could have accommodated 3 wagons riding abreast. Guards watched from battlements, their minds adding to the constant background noise that was her existence. Thoughts pressed against her consciousness like waves against shore, relentless and overwhelming. After 7 years, she had learned to filter the worst of it, to build mental walls that kept the flood at bay. But it never truly stopped. The voices never went silent, until they brought her into the war room. The change was so sudden, so absolute, that Elara stumbled. One of the soldiers caught her elbow, steadying her while his thoughts buzzed with concern and suspicion. But she barely noticed. For the first time in 23 years, her mind was quiet. The room was large, dominated by a table covered in maps and reports. Military efficiency defined every detail from the weapon racks along the walls to the strategic positions of chairs that allowed clear sightlines to all entrances. A fire burned in the massive hearth, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the men gathered around the table. But Elara only saw one of them. He stood at the head of the table, hands braced against the wood, studying a map with the kind of focus that suggested the weight of kingdoms rested in the details. 31 years old, according to the stories, though his eyes carried decades more. Dark blonde hair fell past his shoulders, pulled back from a face that would have been handsome if not for the hardness carved into every feature by war and loss. Scars marked his hands and forearms, the kind earned through combat rather than ceremony. King Magnus Ironhart, the Wolf of the North, the man who had claimed his throne at 19 years old by surviving a massacre and spending the next 12 years proving he deserved to keep it. And his mind was completely, utterly, impossibly silent. Elara swayed again, this time from disorientation rather than relief. Her entire existence had been defined by mental noise, by the constant invasion of other people's thoughts. She had never known true quiet. Even alone in the deepest wilderness, her own thoughts echoed too loud in the absence of other voices. But here, now, nothing. It was like stepping from a roaring river into absolute stillness. Captain Marcus cleared his throat. Your Majesty, we encountered this woman on the northern patrol route. She claims to have intelligence regarding coordinated noble assassinations. Given the sensitive nature of her allegations, I thought it best to bring her directly. Magnus did not look up from his map immediately. When he did, his eyes were the color of winter storms, gray-blue, and just as cold. They swept over her with the same analytical precision he had been applying to military positions, cataloging details and calculating threat assessment in seconds. Elara forced herself to stand straight despite exhaustion and disorientation. This man was dangerous. Every instinct she possessed screamed the warning. Not dangerous in the way of brutal thugs or mindless violence, but dangerous in the way of predators who understood exactly how to kill efficiently and without hesitation. "Your name," he said. His voice matched his presence, deep and commanding without needing to raise volume. "Elara Ashford." She saw no point in deception. "Former of the Eastern Pax, currently freelance intelligence contractor working with human forces on your southern borders." Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or merely filing away information for later use. "You are the exile, the telepath." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes, and you claim to have information about assassination plots." His tone remained neutral, revealing nothing. "Captain Marcus informs me you told him 6 nobles across multiple territories are targeted within 3 days. That is either remarkably specific intelligence or remarkably creative fabrication. Which is it?" Elara met his gaze and made her choice. "Truth or nothing. My uncle, Duke Harrington, sent me coded warning last night. He is targeted at Thornwood Bridge at dawn today. I intercepted 3 mercenaries on my way to warn him. Reading their thoughts gave me the broader picture. This is not isolated killing. This is coordinated destabilization." Magnus remained utterly still for a long moment. Then he straightened, his full attention now focused on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Prove it. Tell me what my captain is thinking right now." Elara turned to look at Marcus, reaching out with her telepathy. His thoughts came easily, trained military mind with surface concerns and deeper loyalties. "He is wondering if I am dangerous and whether you should have me restrained. He is also thinking about his daughter. Her naming ceremony is next week, and he hopes this matter resolves quickly enough that he can return home in time to attend." Marcus's hand dropped to his sword hilt, eyes widening. "How could you possibly know about Sarah's ceremony? I have told no one here." "Because I can hear your thoughts, Captain. Every fear, every hope, every tactical calculation running through your mind right now." Elara returned her attention to Magnus. "Shall I prove it further? Tell me what the guard in the North Tower is thinking." Magnus's expression shifted fractionally, interest replacing suspicion. "The North Tower is 3 floors above us and 2 corridors away. You can reach that far?" Elara closed her eyes and extended her range. The distance required effort, like stretching a muscle near its limit, but she found the guard's consciousness. He is cold, wishes his shift would end, and he is thinking about a woman he met at the market yesterday, wondering if she will agree to meet him again when he has leave. When she opened her eyes, Magnus was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Without his thoughts to guide her, she was navigating blind through this conversation. It created a vulnerability she had not experienced since childhood. "That could be lucky guessing," Magnus said, but his tone suggested he did not believe his own words. He moved around the table, each step deliberate and measured. "Tell me what I am thinking. If you are truly as powerful as you claim, read the mind of a king." Elara tried. She reached for his consciousness the way she had reached for thousands of others. But where his mind should have been, she encountered only that blessed, terrifying silence. "Nothing. I cannot read you. You are the first person in my entire life whose thoughts I cannot hear." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Why?" "I do not know." She heard the frustration in her own voice. "Everyone else is an open book, but you are blank pages." Silence. Magnus's hand moved unconsciously to his throat, fingers brushing against something beneath his shirt collar. The gesture lasted only a heartbeat before he caught himself and dropped his hand. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight it had not held before. "I have heard rumors over the years, whispers of an exiled telepath who wandered the territories, a young woman cast out by her pack for invasion of privacy. That is you, is it not?" "Yes. And yet here you are, conveniently appearing with information about assassination plots." He circled her slowly, predator assessing prey. "How do I know this is not a trap? How do I know you are not working with whoever is behind these attacks, sent to distract me while they carry out their real plans?" Elara forced herself to remain still, to not track his movement. "Because if I wanted to harm you, I would not have approached your patrol in the open and allowed myself to be bound and brought here. I would have used my abilities from distance, fed false information to your scouts, manipulated your commanders." She paused, then added quietly, "And because my uncle is one of the targets, I am not going to conspire in the murder of my only remaining family." Magnus stopped in front of her. Their eyes met and held. Without his thoughts to guide her, Elara was forced to read body language and instinct. What she saw there was calculation, yes, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps. The acknowledgement that came when one survivor of trauma recognized another. "Your hands are steady," he observed. "Most people show fear when standing before a king who holds their life in his palm. But your pulse is controlled, your breathing even. You have stood before worse than me. I have stood before my own pack elders and heard them pronounce exile for something I could not control." Elara kept her voice level. "I have worked battlefields where men died because I read enemy intentions seconds too late. Fear is a luxury I cannot afford, Your Majesty. There is only the mission. Right now, that mission is keeping my uncle alive and stopping whatever larger plan is unfolding." Magnus studied her for another long moment. Then he turned to Captain Marcus. "Send riders to Thornwood Bridge immediately. Find Duke Harrington and bring him here under full guard. I want reports from our contacts in the territories she mentioned, and I want our council assembled within the hour." To Elara he said, "You will remain here. If your information proves accurate, we will discuss terms. If it proves false, you will face consequences for wasting my time and resources. Either way, you are not leaving this fortress until I understand exactly what is happening." It was not trust, but it was not immediate execution either. Elara nodded acceptance. "Understood." Magnus gestured to the guards flanking her. "Take her to the East Wing quarters. Post guards, but treat her as guest, not prisoner. For now." He looked at Elara again, and something in his expression shifted. "And someone bring her food. She looks half dead from exhaustion." As the guards led her from the war room, Elara glanced back once. Magnus had returned to his maps, but she caught him touching his throat again, fingers seeking that hidden object beneath his collar. Whatever he wore there, whatever created that impossible silence, he guarded it unconsciously. And in that moment, Elara realized the most dangerous truth of all. For the first time in her life, she wanted to hear someone's thoughts, needed to know what existed behind that silence. Because without access to his mind, she had no way to verify if his offer of protection was genuine or if she had walked willingly into a cage far more sophisticated than crude rope and silver. The quarters they assigned her were far better than anything she had known in 7 years of wandering. A real bed with clean linens, a window overlooking training yards where soldiers practiced with brutal efficiency, a writing desk and chair, a wash basin with water that was blessedly warm. Elara cleaned the road dirt from her face and hands, watching the water turn gray. Her reflection in the polished metal mirror showed someone harder than the girl who had been exiled at 16. 7 years had carved away softness, replaced innocence with scars both visible and hidden. The food arrived before she finished washing. A young servant girl brought a tray laden with bread, cheese, dried meat, and fruit. The girl's thoughts fluttered nervously. Is she really a telepath? Can she hear me now? I should not stare, but Father says telepaths are dangerous. "Thank you," Elara said gently, taking the tray. "You may go." The girl fled with obvious relief. Elara ate mechanically, fueling her body while her mind worked through the problem before her. Magnus knew what she was. He had known before Captain Marcus brought her to the war room, which meant he had been tracking her movements, gathering intelligence about the exiled telepath. The question was why. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, painting shadows across the training yard below. Elara watched soldiers drill with the kind of precision that came from leadership that demanded excellence and inspired loyalty in equal measure. She reached out with her telepathy, sampling thoughts randomly. These men respected their king. More than that, they would die for him. Not from fear or compulsion, but from genuine belief that he was worth the sacrifice. That was rare. Most leaders commanded through authority or threat. Magnus had earned devotion through something deeper. The summons came as afternoon began its slide toward evening. A different guard this time, older, with a face weathered by campaigns. "The king requests your presence in the council chambers." Elara rose and followed without question. The fortress hallways were wide enough for soldiers to move quickly in formation. Defensive architecture made beautiful. Everything in this place spoke of a ruler who understood that kingdoms were not held through ceremony, but through steel and strategy. The council chamber was larger than the war room, with space for dozens of advisors and nobles. But today it held only 12 people seated around a massive oval table. Magnus sat at the head, Captain Marcus to his right. The others ranged in age and bearing, but all shared the same sharp attention of people accustomed to making decisions that shaped lives. Elara was directed to stand behind Magnus's chair. The position was deliberate, not at the table as equal, but close enough to participate. Guest and prisoner in one, her status still undecided. Magnus began without preamble. Duke Harrington was found safe 2 miles from Thornwood Bridge. He confirmed receiving anonymous warning of assassination attempt and chose to avoid the meeting location. Our scouts found evidence of ambush preparation at the bridge. 3 sets of tracks, professional setup, military-grade equipment left behind in their haste to retreat when the target failed to appear. Elara felt tension drain from her shoulders. Her uncle lived. The warning had been enough. Magnus continued, gesturing to the maps spread across the table. Further investigation confirms suspicion of coordinated targeting. We have received concerning reports from 2 neighboring territories regarding unusual mercenary activity near the estates of high-ranking nobles. The pattern matches what Miss Ashford described. One of the council members, an elderly man with a beard more gray than black, leaned forward. His thoughts were skeptical, but not hostile. "This is still circumstantial, Your Majesty. We have evidence of mercenary activity, which is hardly unusual in these times. And we have the word of a known telepath who appeared conveniently with warnings. Forgive my bluntness, but how do we know this is not elaborate manipulation? Telepaths can read thoughts, yes, but can they also plant them?" Elara spoke before she could stop herself. "No, I cannot plant thoughts or control minds. I can only read what already exists. And I did not create the mercenaries at Thornwood Bridge or the ambush preparations your scouts found." The elderly counselor's gaze shifted to her. "You will speak when addressed, girl. This is a council of the king's most trusted advisors. You are here on sufferance." "Enough, Counselor Henrik." Magnus's voice cut through the building tension. "Miss Ashford has proven the value of her information. Duke Harrington lives because of her warning. That alone earns her right to voice." Henrik's thoughts simmered with resentment, but he inclined his head in acceptance. Magnus stood, drawing all attention back to himself. "The question before us is not whether Miss Ashford's information is valuable. It clearly is. The question is what we do with it. If there truly is a coordinated campaign to destabilize multiple territories through targeted assassinations, we need to understand who benefits and what their end goal might be." Elara listened as the council debated possibilities. Foreign powers, ambitious nobles, even the possibility of a religious faction opposed to the current territorial alliances. Each theory had merit and flaws, but none of them matched what she had read in the mercenaries' minds. The pieces did not quite fit together yet. Someone with resources was funding professional killers. Someone with intelligence networks was identifying targets across multiple kingdoms. And someone knew enough about her bloodline to specifically want her captured alive. "They are not just after nobles," she said quietly. The counselors fell silent, turning to look at her. Magnus gestured for her to continue. "The mercenaries who were hunting my uncle, their orders included a secondary objective. If they encountered me, I was to be taken alive. Whoever is behind this knows what I am and wants to use me." "For what purpose?" Magnus asked. "I do not know yet." Elara met his gaze. "But I intend to find out, because whoever they are, they just made this personal." Magnus studied her for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would change both their futures. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Ashford. Not protection in exchange for service, but genuine alliance. Stay here. Work with my intelligence officers. Teach them what you know about reading patterns in human behavior, about detecting deception, about thinking like the enemy. In exchange, you will have full access to our resources, our information networks, and our military support to track whoever is hunting your bloodline." "That is not protection," Henrik protested. "That is giving a known telepath access to our most sensitive operations." "That is recruiting the best intelligence asset available," Magnus countered. His tone left no room for debate. Miss Ashford has spent 3 years working with human military forces. She understands tactics and strategy. She can verify truth in a way no conventional interrogation ever could. And most importantly, she has proven herself willing to risk her own life to warn someone she could have simply abandoned. He turned back to Elara. "This would not be temporary contract work. I am offering you a position, rank and authority within our command structure. The chance to be something more than wandering exile trading your gifts for survival." Elara felt the weight of every eye in the room. These people feared what she represented, feared the invasion of their private thoughts, the loss of their secret plans, the vulnerability that came from being readable. But Magnus, whose mind remained blessedly, mysteriously silent, was offering her something she had not had since her exile: purpose, partnership, the chance to choose her own path rather than simply reacting to circumstances. Why? The question escaped before she could calculate whether asking was wise. Why offer this to someone you just met? Someone whose thoughts you cannot read and therefore cannot fully trust? Magnus's expression shifted, revealing something beneath the military commander's mask. Something that might have been understanding, or recognition, or shared pain. Because I know what it means to have no one at your back, to stand alone against threats you cannot defeat through strength alone. And because in war, you do not always get to choose your allies from among friends. Sometimes you have to build trust with strangers and hope you both survive long enough for that trust to mean something. Silence held the room. Then Elara spoke the words that would bind her fate to his. "I accept your offer, Your Majesty, temporarily, until the threat is eliminated and my uncle is safe." Magnus's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. "Temporarily. Agreed." Over the following weeks, Elara settled into a routine that felt dangerously close to belonging. She was assigned permanent quarters in the East Wing, close enough to the king's own chambers that she could reach him quickly if needed, but far enough to maintain propriety. Guards were posted outside her door, but they were there to protect her as much as monitor her movements. She spent mornings in the war room, teaching Magnus's officers techniques she had developed over 3 years of intelligence work. How to watch for tells in body language that suggested deception. How to ask questions that revealed truth, even when answers were lies. How to think like enemy commanders and anticipate their strategies. The officers were skeptical at first. She was young, female, and an outsider with abilities they found unsettling. But gradually, as her methods produced results, skepticism shifted to grudging respect. Afternoons were spent in the training yards. Magnus had been blunt about her weaknesses. You cannot rely solely on telepathy. What happens when you face an enemy who shields their thoughts, or when you are simply too exhausted to read them? You need to survive on your own skills. So she trained, hand-to-hand combat with instructors who did not pull strikes because she was small or female. Blade work until her palms blistered and bled. Archery until her shoulders screamed from the repetitive motion of draw and release. It was brutal and exhausting and exactly what she needed. Magnus occasionally joined the training sessions. She learned to read his fighting style through observation since his thoughts remained inaccessible. He was fast, efficient, and absolutely ruthless. Every movement served purpose. No wasted energy, no flourish or showmanship. Just the brutal economy of a warrior who had learned survival through necessity. After one particularly intense sparring session where she finally managed to land a strike that forced him to concede the point, Magnus tossed her a water skin and offered rare praise. "You learn quickly. Most nobles would spend months on basic forms before attempting real engagement. You adapted in days." "I have had excellent motivation," Elara replied, still catching her breath. "You do not hold back. Holding back gets people killed." His expression was serious as he met her eyes. When real threat comes, your enemy will not care that you are still learning. They will exploit every weakness without mercy. "Then I will eliminate my weaknesses." She drained half the water skin and wiped sweat from her face. "Teach me." Evenings brought council meetings where Elara stood behind Magnus's throne and listened, not just to spoken words, but to the thoughts beneath them. She learned to distinguish genuine counsel from self-interest, honest concern from political maneuvering. 3 times in the first month, she caught whispers of disloyalty, thoughts that suggested certain nobles were considering betrayal if the price was right. Magnus handled each case differently. Not immediate arrests or executions, but careful political maneuvering that isolated the potential traitors without creating martyrs or sparking rebellion. He was a chess player, thinking 5 moves ahead, understanding that ruling required more than strength. It required wisdom to know when to strike and when to wait. One night, after a particularly long council session, Elara found herself in the fortress library. Sleep had become elusive, her mind too active with everything she was learning. The library was massive, 3 stories of books and scrolls collected over generations. At midnight, it should have been deserted. Instead, she found Magnus. He sat in a deep armchair near the fireplace, a book open on his lap, but his gaze distant. The firelight painted shadows across his face, highlighting the scars and the weariness he never showed in public. For a moment, watching him unaware, Elara saw not a king, but a man carrying impossible weight. She almost left without disturbing him. But something, maybe the telepathic silence that was his presence, maybe simple loneliness, made her step forward instead. "Cannot sleep either?" Her voice was quiet, not wanting to startle. Magnus looked up, surprise flickering across his features, before settling back into neutral assessment. "Miss Ashford, I thought everyone else had retired for the evening." "Everyone else does not have a mind that never truly rests." Elara moved closer to the fire, drawn by its warmth and the peaceful silence his presence created. "May I sit?" He gestured to the chair opposite his. Of course, they sat in comfortable quiet for several minutes. Elara stared into the flames and allowed herself to simply exist without the constant pressure of other people's thoughts. Being near Magnus was like standing in the eye of a hurricane. The chaos still raged beyond, but here, in this small space, there was calm. "What are you reading?" she finally asked. "Military history." Magnus closed the book and set it aside. Campaigns of the border wars from 80 years ago, looking for patterns that might illuminate our current situation. "And have you found any?" "Some. The patterns of destabilization tactics have not changed much across generations. Target leadership, create chaos, move in to restore order under new authority." He paused, his gaze settling on her with intensity. "What I have not found is historical precedent for a telepath of your strength. The records mention mind readers, but they were always limited. Surface thoughts only, close range, unreliable under stress. You are something different. My father believed I was moonborn bloodline." Elara spoke the words she had told no one else. Ancient line of telepaths from before the territories were divided. They were supposed to be extinct. Magnus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his full attention now focused on her in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Moonborn. I have read those legends. Telepaths powerful enough to link entire packs mentally, to prevent wars through forced empathy." He searched her face. That kind of power would terrify people, make you target of anyone seeking control. "It is why he exiled me." Elara swallowed against unexpected emotion. "To hide me, to keep me safe from those who would use me or destroy me. I thought he was ashamed, but he was protecting me the only way he knew how. By sending you away alone." Magnus's voice carried understanding that could only come from personal experience of loss. "That is cruel mercy, the kind of sacrifice that torments the one who makes it more than the one who suffers it." Their eyes met and held. In that moment, without words or thoughts, something passed between them. Recognition of shared trauma, acknowledgement of scars that never fully healed, understanding that some burdens could only be carried by those who had lived them. Magnus stood abruptly, the moment breaking. "It is late. We both have early obligations." He hesitated, then added, "You fight well, Miss Ashford. You think strategically. And you have given me no reason to doubt your loyalty. Those are rare qualities. Do not undervalue them." Before she could respond, he left the library. Elara sat in the silence he left behind, staring at the chair that still held the warmth of his presence. Something had shifted tonight. Some invisible boundary had been acknowledged, even if not yet crossed. And in the blessed quiet of her own mind, without the chaos of other thoughts to distract her, Elara admitted a truth she had been avoiding. She was falling for a man whose thoughts she could never read, a man whose mind remained eternally silent to her gift. It should have been impossible. How could she trust someone she could not verify? How could she build connection with someone whose inner world was completely hidden? But somehow, impossibly, that silence had become the thing she craved most. The discovery of Lord Aldrich's treachery came not through dramatic confrontation, but through patient observation. Elara had been working with Magnus's intelligence corps for 6 weeks when she noticed something odd about the Master of Coin's thoughts during council meetings. Aldrich was smooth, experienced, a man who had served Magnus's father before the coup and had helped the young king rebuild after that terrible night 12 years ago. His surface thoughts were always appropriate, always focused on fiscal responsibility and kingdom prosperity. But beneath that surface, hidden in the deeper currents of consciousness that most telepaths never bothered to explore, something else lurked: fear, guilt, and worst of all, calculation. Elara did not raise the alarm immediately. That would have been foolish. Instead, she watched. She listened. She catalogued every stray thought, every moment when Aldrich's inner monologue did not quite match his spoken words. The pattern revealed itself over 2 weeks. Aldrich was not just planning betrayal. He had been planning it for years. He was a sleeper agent, planted by General Constantine Varn, who had been Magnus's father's most trusted military commander before betraying that trust. The poison plot was elegant in its simplicity. Not an immediate assassination, but a gradual weakening. Small doses in Magnus's evening wine over months until his health declined enough that transition of power would seem natural. Then chaos, confusion, and Constantine's forces would arrive to restore order, with Aldrich positioned to legitimize the new regime. Elara brought her evidence to Magnus privately. They met in his study, away from servants and guards, and anyone whose thoughts might carry news beyond these walls. She laid out everything she had discovered, every detail of Aldrich's guilt laid bare through his own unguarded thoughts. Magnus listened without interruption. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Not anger, though that surely burned beneath the surface, but something deeper: weariness, the kind that came from being betrayed too many times. "My father trusted Aldrich," he said quietly, "considered him friend as well as advisor." His fingers moved unconsciously to his throat, touching something hidden beneath his shirt. "And all this time, he has been working for the man who murdered my family." Elara wanted to reach out, to offer comfort through touch or words. But Magnus was a king, and kings could not afford to show vulnerability before witnesses. So instead, she offered what she could give: strategy. "Do not arrest him yet." Her voice was calm, tactical. "He is not acting alone. If we move now, his co-conspirators will scatter. But if we feed him false information, watch who he contacts, we can trace the entire network." Magnus's gaze sharpened. "You are suggesting we use my would-be poisoner as bait. I am suggesting we turn a weapon aimed at you back against your enemies." She held his stare. "That requires risk, yes. But it also requires you to trust my ability to monitor him closely enough that the danger never becomes real. And you believe you can do that? Watch him every moment? Catch any attempt before it succeeds?" "Yes." Such confidence. A hint of something that might have been admiration colored his tone. "Tell me, Miss Ashford, do you ever doubt yourself?" "Every day. But doubt is luxury I cannot afford. Action is all that matters." Magnus smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from hard commander to someone younger, someone who might have laughed more before war carved away softness. "You think like intelligence officer. Perhaps I should stop calling you Miss Ashford and start calling you Major." Elara felt warmth spread through her chest at the casual promotion, the acknowledgement that she had become more than exile seeking temporary refuge, but she kept her voice professional. "Focus on the mission, Your Majesty. We have traitor to catch and network to dismantle." So they set the trap. Over the following days, Magnus arranged for Lord Aldrich to overhear carefully crafted false intelligence. Troop movements that did not exist, supply routes that were fictitious, vulnerabilities in border defenses that were actually strengthened positions waiting to ambush anyone foolish enough to attack. Elara watched Aldrich's mind carefully, watched him memorize the false information, watched him plan how to pass it along, and when he finally made contact with his handlers, she was there, reading every thought, tracing every connection. The network was larger than they had anticipated. 3 other nobles, 2 military officers, even a servant placed in the royal kitchen specifically to gain access to Magnus's food and drink. All of them connected back to General Constantine, all of them working toward the day when they could claim they were restoring proper order after Magnus's inevitable collapse. The arrests happened simultaneously at dawn. Every conspirator taken at once, too quickly for word to spread and warn others. Magnus handled it personally, leading the operation with the same cold efficiency he brought to battle. No drama, no speeches, just swift action and overwhelming force. Elara stood beside him when they confronted Lord Aldrich. The old man's thoughts were chaos, terror mixed with desperate calculation. He tried to deny everything, tried to claim loyalty and protest innocence. Magnus simply looked at him and said, "Miss Ashford has heard every thought in your head for the past 2 weeks. She knows about Constantine. She knows about the poison. She knows everything. The only question now is whether you cooperate and receive exile, or resist and face execution for treason." Aldrich crumpled, broken by the knowledge that his mind had betrayed him more thoroughly than any conventional investigation ever could. He confessed, gave up names, locations, plans that had not yet been discovered. Everything spilled out in desperate hope of mercy. Magnus granted exile, not mercy exactly, but pragmatic calculation. Dead traitors could not provide ongoing intelligence. Living exiles could be watched, their contacts monitored, their attempts at revenge anticipated and countered. In the aftermath, as the fortress settled back into routine and the immediate threat was contained, Magnus summoned Elara to the gardens. It was evening, the first frost of autumn painting everything in silver. They walked the paths in silence for a time, both exhausted by the weight of what had been uncovered. "Thank you." Magnus's voice was quiet, almost lost in the whisper of wind through bare branches. "You saved my life. Probably many lives, I will not forget that." "I did what needed to be done." Elara wrapped her arms around herself against the chill. Any competent intelligence officer would have done the same. "But you are not just any officer." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "You are someone who has been betrayed and exiled and hurt in ways most people never experience. And yet you chose to protect someone you barely know, to stay and fight rather than run to safety. That is not duty or competence. That is character." Elara met his eyes and felt something shift in her chest. Standing here in the twilight, with his mind still blessedly silent and his expression open in a way it rarely was before others, she saw him clearly. Not the king with all his power and responsibility, just a man trying to do an impossible job while carrying scars that had never properly healed. "I stay because this place feels like home," she said quietly. "The first place that has felt that way since my exile. I stay because being near you brings peace I have not known in 7 years. And I stay because whether you trust me or I trust you, we fight well together." His hand moved as if to reach for hers, then hesitated. The moment stretched between them, heavy with potential and restraint. Then trumpets sounded from the main gate, shattering the silence. Emergency call. Threat approaching. They ran together toward the fortress, arriving as the gates opened to admit a contingent of riders. But these were not enemies. They were messengers bearing the crests of allied territories, 6 of them, each representing a different kingdom or duchy. And every single one brought the same news. They requested King Magnus's presence at the Winter Conclave, the annual gathering of territorial leaders where alliances were renewed and military strategies coordinated for the coming year. Captain Marcus met them in the courtyard, his expression grim. The conclave is being held at Blackstone Fortress this year. All 6 major territorial rulers have been invited. Standard protocol, except for one thing. His gaze found Elara. The invitation specifically mentions that you may bring military advisors and intelligence personnel. It would be appropriate for your new intelligence officer to attend. Magnus understood immediately what Elara read in Marcus's thoughts. This was opportunity and danger wrapped together. Every major leader in one location. If someone wanted to destabilize the entire region, attacking during the conclave would achieve maximum chaos with minimum effort. "We go," Magnus decided. "Full military escort, triple the usual security. And Miss Ashford stays at my side every moment. If there is trap waiting, I want our best warning system present when it springs." Elara nodded agreement, but unease settled in her stomach. Something about this felt wrong, felt orchestrated, as if pieces were moving into position on a board whose full layout she could not yet see. That night, unable to sleep before their departure, she found herself in the library again. And again, Magnus was there. This was becoming pattern between them, these late-night encounters where walls came down and truth could be spoken without the weight of crowns and duty. "You are worried about the conclave." He did not phrase it as question. "I am worried about how convenient it seems." Elara took her usual chair across from his. "Every major leader gathered in one place. If I were planning to destabilize the region, this is exactly the moment I would choose to strike." "I know." Magnus leaned forward, elbows on knees in that posture she had come to recognize as his thinking position. "But if we do not attend, we appear weak, afraid. That invites different kind of threat. So we go, prepared, and trust our people to keep us alive." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I trust you. To warn me if your telepathy detects incoming attack. To stand with me if everything falls apart. That is why I want you there, Elara. Not just because you are useful, but because you are partner I choose to have at my back." Her name. He had used her name, not her title or formal address. Something warm unfurled in her chest at the intimacy of it, and when she spoke, his name felt natural on her lips. "I will be there, Magnus, whatever comes. We face it together." His smile was slight but genuine. Together. I am still learning what that word means. But with you, it feels less terrifying than it once did. They sat in comfortable silence after that, both knowing that tomorrow would bring danger and uncertainty. But tonight, in this quiet space, they were simply two people who had found unexpected connection in unlikely circumstances. Neither spoke of the attraction building between them. Neither acknowledged the moments when glances lingered too long or when accidental touches sent warmth racing through skin. There were too many barriers. She was exile without pack or status. He was king with expectations of political marriage and heirs of impeccable bloodline. But in the silence they shared, in the peace his presence brought her exhausted mind, something was growing that neither could quite name or deny. And as Elara finally returned to her quarters in the early hours before dawn, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened at the Winter Conclave would change everything. The world was shifting, old enemies moving into position, new alliances forming in shadows, and she stood at the center of it all, a telepath who could read every mind except the one that mattered most. The one she was falling in love with, despite every logical reason not to. Tomorrow they would ride to the conclave. Tomorrow the trap would spring, if trap there was. Tomorrow she would prove herself warrior as well as intelligence officer. But tonight, for these last few hours of peace, she let herself imagine a future where kings could choose love over duty, where exiles could find home, where silence between minds could mean trust rather than mystery. Tomorrow would bring war and truth in equal measure. Tonight, she allowed herself the luxury of hope. The journey to Blackstone Fortress took 3 days by mounted column. Magnus traveled with 200 soldiers, a show of strength that was also practical necessity. The roads between territories were never truly safe, even in times of nominal peace. Bandits, rival factions, creatures that had forgotten they were once human, all posed threats to those who traveled without sufficient protection. Elara rode near the front of the column, positioned close enough to Magnus that she could reach him quickly if needed, but not so close that it appeared presumptuous. The other nobles and military commanders watched her with mixture of curiosity and wariness. She was an anomaly in their ordered world, a woman with no pack affiliation who somehow commanded the king's trust and attention. Their thoughts pressed against her consciousness constantly. Who is she really? What hold does she have over him? Can we trust a telepath with access to our strategies? The questions circled endlessly, variations on the same theme of fear and suspicion. But when she rode close enough to Magnus, when that blessed silence enveloped her like a protective cloak, the noise dimmed to manageable levels. She had begun to crave his presence, not just for the peace it brought, but for what that peace allowed her to be. Around him, she was not just a telepath struggling to filter infinite mental chatter. She was simply herself. They made camp the second night in a valley sheltered by ancient pines. While soldiers erected tents and established perimeter guards, Magnus called his senior officers to a planning session. Elara attended, her role now accepted if not entirely welcomed. Colonel Helena Stormwind spread maps across a portable table, her weathered hands marking key positions with practiced efficiency. She was 63 years old and had served Magnus's father before the coup. She had been the one to rally surviving loyalists when the young prince's world fell apart, the one who held the broken pieces together long enough for him to learn how to lead. Her thoughts were always clear, tactical, focused. She was one of the few people Elara genuinely enjoyed reading because there was no deception, no hidden agenda, just pure military pragmatism. Blackstone Fortress sits at the convergence of 3 territories, Helena explained, her finger tracing routes on the map. Defensible position, which is why it was chosen for the conclave. But that defensibility works both ways. If someone wanted to trap 6 territorial leaders in one location, This would be ideal ground. Captain Marcus leaned over the map, studying approaches. We will arrive tomorrow afternoon. That gives us less than a day to assess security before the conclave begins. Not enough time for thorough reconnaissance. Then we start tonight. Magnus's voice carried command that brooked no argument. Send scouts ahead. I want full reports on guard positions, supply lines, any unusual activity in the surrounding area. And I want redundant communication protocols established. If something goes wrong, I need to know immediately. Elara watched him work, directing his officers with confidence born from 12 years of military command. This was where he was most comfortable, she realized, not in throne rooms making political decisions, but in war councils planning for threats and contingencies. He was soldier first, king second, and that inverted priority was probably what kept him alive when so many others had fallen. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, and felt every eye turn to her. The other officers still were not accustomed to her speaking up in tactical discussions. "May I suggest something?" Magnus gestured for her to continue. "Let me go ahead with the scouts. My telepathy can detect ambush or hostile intent from further distance than visual reconnaissance. If there is trap waiting, I can give you advance warning." "Absolutely not." The response came not from Magnus, but from Helena, her thoughts blazing with protective concern. "You are too valuable to risk on forward reconnaissance. If you are captured or killed, we lose our primary intelligence advantage, which is precisely why I should go," Elara countered. "If someone is planning to attack the conclave, they will be shielding their preparations from normal observation, but they cannot shield their thoughts from me. I can identify threats your scouts would ride past without noticing." Magnus was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Without access to his thoughts, Elara could not gauge whether he was considering her proposal or already dismissing it. Finally, he spoke. "You go with full squad of our best rangers. You stay in the center of their formation at all times, and you maintain mental contact with me throughout. If I sense anything wrong through our connection, you abort immediately and return. Understood?" Elara blinked in surprise. "Our connection? We do not have telepathic connection. I cannot read you." Something flickered in his eyes, too quick to identify. "No, but I can sense your presence. When you are near, there is a quality to the silence that changes. If that presence disappears or feels wrong, I will know something has happened." It was not telepathy, but it was something, some awareness that existed between them that neither fully understood. Elara nodded acceptance. Understood. She left with 6 rangers an hour before dawn. These were not standard soldiers, but specialists, men and women who could move through hostile territory like ghosts. Their thoughts were disciplined, focused entirely on the mission. No fear, no distraction, just professional competence. The lead ranger was a woman named Sarah, 40 years old, with a scar running from her left eyebrow to her jawline. She had lost her family in a border raid 15 years ago and had spent every day since ensuring no one else suffered the same fate. Her thoughts were always tinged with old grief, but it had been tempered into something useful, fuel for vigilance rather than paralysis. The forest around Blackstone Fortress was dense with underbrush and deadfall, perfect terrain for ambush. Elara extended her telepathic sense as far as she could reach, scanning for hostile minds. The rangers moved in practiced formation around her, weapons ready but not drawn, eyes constantly assessing their surroundings. 2 miles from the fortress, Elara felt the first anomaly. It was not a clear thought or direct hostile intent. It was absence, a void where minds should be. She raised her hand in the signal the rangers had taught her, and the entire squad froze instantly. "Something ahead," she whispered. "Not visible, but I can sense it. Deliberate emptiness, like someone is trying very hard to think about nothing." Sarah's hand moved to her blade hilt. "How many?" "At least 3. Maybe more. They are using some kind of mental discipline to suppress surface thoughts. But the effort itself creates a signature." She pointed to a cluster of boulders 30 yards ahead. "There, and there." She indicated a fallen tree, and possibly in the canopy above. The rangers moved with silent efficiency. They did not charge or call out challenge. They simply faded into the forest, circling to flank positions while remaining invisible to anyone watching the main approach. Elara stayed where she was, reaching deeper with her telepathy, trying to penetrate the mental shields. There, a crack in this discipline. One of the hidden watchers let his concentration slip for just a heartbeat, and Elara caught a fragment of thought. King Magnus must not reach the fortress. The conclave will be our killing ground. All 6 leaders, all at once. She pulled back her telepathic probe carefully, not wanting to alert them that they had been detected. Then she sent mental call back toward the main column, focusing on the presence she had learned to associate with Magnus. She could not send him thoughts or words, but she could project emotion, urgency, danger, warning. 2 miles away, Magnus sat straighter in his saddle. Something was wrong. He could not explain how he knew, could not point to specific evidence, but the certainty was absolute. Elara was in danger. "Colonel Helena," he called out sharply, "full alert. Something is happening ahead." The column responded instantly, generations of military discipline transforming casual march into combat readiness in seconds. Weapons were drawn, formations tightened, scouts spread wider to cover flanks. In the forest, Sarah and her rangers had completed their flanking maneuver. At her signal, they struck simultaneously from 3 directions. The ambushers, focused on watching the main approach, never saw the attack coming. It was over in less than 30 seconds. 5 enemy scouts subdued, bound, and disarmed before they could raise alarm or take their own lives. Elara approached the prisoners carefully, reading their thoughts now that they were too shocked to maintain mental shields. What she found made her blood run cold. These were not random bandits or opportunistic mercenaries. They were professional military scouts, well-trained and well-equipped, and their orders came directly from General Constantine Varn. The conclave was not just a trap for Magnus. It was a coordinated assassination attempt against all 6 territorial leaders. Kill them all simultaneously, plunge the region into chaos and succession crisis, then move in with prepared military force to restore order under new management. It was ambitious, it was ruthless, and it would absolutely work if they succeeded. "How long until the attack?" Elara demanded, focusing on the scout whose mind was least disciplined. His thoughts spilled out under her telepathic pressure. "Tomorrow night, during the formal banquet. Poison in the wine, assassination teams positioned throughout the fortress, fires to create chaos and cover escape routes. No survivors." Elara felt sick. They had less than 24 hours to prevent massacre. Sarah sent 1 ranger back to warn Magnus while the rest secured the prisoners. When the main column arrived an hour later, Magnus listened to Elara's report with expression that grew progressively harder. "So we ride directly into trap if we attend the conclave," he said flatly. "And if we do not attend, the other 5 leaders die and we appear either cowardly or complicit. Those are our options." "There is a third option," Elara said quietly. "We attend, but we turn their trap against them. Use my telepathy to identify every assassin, every poisoned cup, every fire team. And instead of victims, we become the ones who spring the ambush." Helena shook her head sharply. "Too risky. Too many variables we cannot control. Better to warn the other leaders and coordinate a unified response." "And how do we warn them without revealing we have a telepath?" Marcus asked. "The moment that information becomes public, Miss Ashford becomes target for every faction that wants to control or eliminate her abilities." Magnus looked at Elara, and she saw the weight of command in his eyes, the burden of making decisions that meant life or death for hundreds. "What do you recommend? Not as my intelligence officer, but as the person whose abilities would be tested beyond anything you have done before." Elara thought about running, about the 7 years she had spent avoiding exactly this kind of situation, about how easy it would be to simply walk away, to let these leaders and their political games burn while she disappeared into another anonymous town. But then she thought about her uncle, about Colonel Helena's daughter, about all the innocent people who would die in the chaos that would follow if this plot succeeded. And she thought about Magnus, who had given her purpose and partnership and something that felt dangerously like home. "We go," she said firmly. "We prepare, and we win, because the alternative is unacceptable." Magnus held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, decision made. "We go. Colonel Helena, I need detailed floor plans of Blackstone Fortress. Captain Marcus, coordinate with the other territorial security details, but do so carefully. No direct mention of assassination plot yet, just heightened awareness protocols. Miss Ashford will need to be positioned where she can scan the greatest number of minds simultaneously during the banquet." The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation. They arrived at Blackstone Fortress as the sun reached its zenith, banners flying, presenting the appearance of routine diplomatic visit. The fortress was impressive, built into the mountainside with walls that seemed to grow from the rock itself. Defensible, but also confining. Perfect for a trap. The other territorial leaders had already arrived. Elara felt their presence like bright flames in her mental landscape. 5 powerful alphas, each radiating authority and confidence. She recognized some from intelligence reports. Duke Aldrich of the Western Reach, a careful politician who preferred alliance to warfare. Duchess Meredith of the Southern Valleys, renowned for her military innovations. Lord Blackwood of the Eastern Highlands, young and aggressive, always pushing at territorial boundaries. And then there was Lady Seraphine. She was beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful, all sharp edges and lethal grace. Early 30s, with hair like midnight and eyes that missed nothing. She commanded the Mountain Territories, a region known for producing the finest warriors in all the lands. Her reputation was formidable, her combat record was flawless, and her thoughts, when Elara brushed against them, were chaos, terror, guilt, desperate calculation, and underneath it all, the howling anguish of a mother whose children were being held hostage. Elara nearly stumbled with the shock of it. She caught Magnus's arm to steady herself, and his hand immediately covered hers in silent question. She could not speak openly here, not with dozens of servants and guards milling about. But she squeezed his hand once, twice, 3 times, their prearranged signal for critical intelligence that required private discussion. Magnus made polite excuses and guided her to a side chamber. The moment the door closed, Elara spoke rapidly. Lady Seraphine is compromised. Her territory was conquered 2 years ago, but kept secret. Her family is being held hostage. She has been feeding intelligence to Constantine in exchange for their lives. She knows about the assassination plot. Magnus's expression went dangerously cold. Then she is part of it. She must be arrested before she can aid the attack. No! Elara gripped his arm, urgent. She does not want any of this. Her thoughts are screaming resistance. She is victim, not willing conspirator. And she has information we need. About Constantine's command structure, about where her family is being held, about weaknesses in his operation that even he does not know she has observed. So what are you suggesting? That we offer her a way out, help us stop the assassination, and we help rescue her family, turn her from enemy asset into allied asset. Magnus studied her face, and she wished desperately that she could read his thoughts, could know whether he saw wisdom or naivety in her proposal. Finally he said, "You would trust her? Even knowing she has been working against us? I would trust her love for her children to be stronger than her fear of Constantine." Elara met his gaze steadily. "And I would trust that a woman who has been forced to betray everything she values would leap at the chance for redemption." Magnus was silent for another long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Arrange a meeting, private, but bring Colonel Helena as witness and security. If this is trap, I want you protected." The meeting happened in Elara's assigned chambers an hour before the banquet. Lady Seraphine arrived with 2 guards whom Elara immediately read as loyal to her personally, not to Constantine. That was good sign. The woman had retained at least some control over her inner circle. Seraphine's eyes found Elara immediately, and her thoughts blazed with recognition. The telepath. So the rumors were true. She knows everything. I am finished. "Please sit," Elara said quietly, gesturing to chairs arranged around a small table. "We do not have much time, so I will be direct. I know about your children. I know about the conquest of your territory. And I know that you have been forced to cooperate with General Constantine against your will." Seraphine's face went absolutely white. Her guards tensed, hands moving toward weapons. But Helena was already positioned to intercept, her own blade half drawn in warning. Seraphine raised a hand, stopping her guards before violence could erupt. She looked at Elara with eyes that held too much pain and too little hope. "If you know all that, then you know I have no choice. They have my daughter and my son, 7 and 9 years old. He sends me letters written in their handwriting, describing what he will do to them if I do not obey. So tell me, telepath, what choice do I have?" "The choice to fight back," Elara said simply. "Help us stop the assassination tonight. In exchange, King Magnus will commit his forces to rescue your children and retake your territory from Constantine's occupation." Seraphine laughed. But it was broken sound without humor. "You think it is that simple? You think I have not spent 2 years searching for a way out? Constantine has my children in a fortress I cannot breach, guarded by forces I cannot defeat. I am one woman with a territory that exists only as fiction. What can you possibly offer that changes that reality?" "Intelligence," Magnus said from the doorway. He entered the room with command presence that immediately dominated the space. "You know things about Constantine that we do not. His routines, his paranoia, his weaknesses. You have been forced to observe him closely for 2 years. That knowledge, combined with our military capability, changes the equation." Seraphine turned to look at him, and Elara read the war happening in her thoughts. Hope battling against fear, desperation fighting with pragmatism, the terrible calculation of whether to risk everything on the word of a king she barely knew. "He will kill them," Seraphine whispered. "If this fails, if I betray him and you cannot reach them in time, he will kill my children." "If this succeeds," Magnus said quietly, moving to stand before her, "I will personally lead the force that brings your children home. And if it fails, if I am dead from the assassination you helped prevent, my forces have standing orders to continue the rescue operation regardless. Either way, your children have a chance. The only question is whether you help us save the other lives at stake tonight." Elara watched the moment Seraphine made her choice, watched the shift in her thoughts from paralyzed victim to active agent. It was like watching someone wake from nightmare and remember they had teeth and claws. "Tell me what you need," Seraphine said. They worked through the evening, coordinating security with a precision that would have been impossible without Seraphine's insider knowledge. She knew which servants were Constantine's agents, which guards had been bribed, which wine casks had been tampered with, which exits were meant to be blocked during the chaos. Elara committed every detail to memory, her telepathy cross-referencing Seraphine's information against the thoughts of everyone in the fortress. The picture that emerged was damning. 23 of Constantine's agents embedded throughout the staff, poison in 3 wine casks, fire teams positioned to torch the banquet hall from outside once the assassinations began. It was comprehensive, professional, and would have been absolutely devastating if they had not discovered it. The banquet began at sunset. 6 territorial leaders gathered in a hall lit by hundreds of candles, surrounded by their security details and advisors. Elara stood behind Magnus's chair, her position accepted now as his intelligence officer. From here, she could scan every mind in the room, tracking thoughts and intentions with exhausting concentration. The servers moved through the gathering with practiced efficiency. Elara identified each one who carried poisoned wine, watching their nervous thoughts betray them even as their hands remained steady. She sent subtle signals to Magnus, who ensured those particular bottles never reached the leader's cups. One of the compromised servers noticed. His thoughts spiked with alarm. "Something is wrong. They are not drinking the poisoned wine. Someone knows." Elara felt the moment when he decided to abandon subtlety. His hand moved toward the knife at his belt, preparing to attack Magnus directly since the poison was failing. She did not think, did not calculate. She simply reached out with her telepathy and squeezed. The server froze mid-motion, his mind locked in sudden paralysis. It was not control, not the way legend spoke of telepaths commanding others. It was more like overwhelming his consciousness with static, filling his thoughts with so much noise that voluntary action became impossible. But the cost was immediate and terrible. Elara's nose began to bleed, warm copper trickling over her lips. Her vision blurred at the edges. Holding even one mind in complete thrall pushed her abilities to their limit. Magnus felt her presence waver and turned immediately. "Elara, stop! Let him go before you hurt yourself." But she could not let go, because the server was not alone. 3 other agents had noticed the failure of the poison plot. All of them were now moving toward violent action, drawing hidden weapons, preparing to attack. Elara reached for them, too. Her consciousness spread like a net, ensnaring all 4 minds simultaneously. The mental strain was crushing. Blood flowed freely from her nose now, and her knees buckled. But she held them, kept them frozen while Magnus's guards moved to disarm and restrain. Then someone grabbed her from behind. The contact broke her concentration completely. The 4 agents collapsed as her telepathic grip released. Elara tried to turn, to see who held her, but rough cloth pressed over her mouth and nose. Chemical smell, bitter and cloying. Sedative. Her last conscious thought was rage at herself for not sensing the attack. for being so focused outward that she missed the threat at her back. Then darkness swallowed her whole. She woke to agony, not physical pain, though her head throbbed and her body ached. Telepathic agony. Someone was pressing against her mind with crude, brutal force, trying to break through her mental defenses not with skill, but with overwhelming power. Elara's eyes snapped open. She was in a tent, hands bound with silver chains that burned against her wrists. The tent was military issue, functional and anonymous. Outside, she could hear soldiers moving, the sounds of a camp preparing for action. Across from her sat a man she recognized from intelligence reports, General Konstantin Varn, 55 years old, scarred face and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. He had been Magnus's father's most trusted commander once. The betrayal that led to the coup and massacre had been his work. And sitting beside him, sweating with effort, was another telepath. The man was perhaps 30, with the look of someone who had never quite recovered from childhood illness. Weak wolf, Elara thought automatically. Probably bullied, probably desperate to prove his worth through the one gift he possessed. His telepathy was raw and undisciplined, all brute force with no finesse. He was trying to read her memories, to tear through her defenses and steal everything she knew. But Elara had spent 23 years learning to build walls, to filter and protect. His assault was painful, but ultimately ineffective. "She is strong!" the telepath gasped, pulling back with effort. "Stronger than anyone I have encountered. I cannot break her, General." Konstantin's expression did not change. "Then we do this the simple way." He drew a knife and held it where Elara could see clearly. "You will tell me everything you know about Magnus's defenses, his strategies, his weaknesses, or I will start removing pieces of you until you do. The choice is yours." Elara met his gaze and smiled through bloody teeth. "You should have killed me when you had the chance, because now Magnus knows I'm gone, and he is coming." Bold words for a woman chained and helpless. Konstantin moved the knife closer to her face. "Let me explain your situation more clearly. You are in my camp surrounded by 60 of my best warriors. Your king is back at the fortress dealing with the aftermath of failed assassination attempt. By the time he organizes rescue, you will have told me everything or you will be dead. Those are your only options." "There is always a third option," Elara said quietly. And then she did something she had never attempted before. She stopped trying to defend against the weak telepath's assault and instead channeled it, used his crude telepathic connection as a conduit to strike back. She poured everything she had into that counterstrike. 23 years of accumulated telepathic experience against his handful of years. It was not even a fair fight. His mind shattered under the assault, and he collapsed, screaming. The silver chains prevented her from shifting, but they did not actually suppress her telepathy. That had been Konstantin's mistake. He had assumed that binding her physically would be enough. He had not understood that her greatest weapon was not her body, but her mind. Elara reached out to every soldier in the camp. 60 minds all at once. It was suicide to attempt it. She knew that. But the alternative was telling this monster everything, betraying Magnus, betraying everyone who had begun to trust her. So she reached, and she pushed, and she held. 60 soldiers froze where they stood, minds locked in sudden paralysis. The mental strain was apocalyptic. Blood poured from Elara's nose, her ears, her eyes. She could feel something tearing deep inside her consciousness, some fundamental limit being exceeded, but she held them. And in that frozen moment, Magnus and his forces struck. They had been tracking her, following the faint mental signature that connected them. Magnus led the charge personally, cutting through guards who could not move, could not resist, could not raise alarm. His sword was red with blood by the time he reached the command tent. Konstantin tried to use Elara as hostage, knife at her throat. But Magnus saw what she was doing, saw the blood and the terrible cost of holding 60 minds captive, and understood immediately that she was dying. "Let her go," Magnus said, his voice absolutely flat. "And maybe you live long enough to stand trial." Konstantin laughed. "Let her go, and 60 soldiers attack you at once. Kill me, and she dies from the strain. You have no winning move here, boy." Magnus's eyes found Elara's. She was barely conscious, blood covering her face, body trembling with catastrophic effort. And in that moment, he made a choice that would change everything. He reached for the silver medallion at his throat, the one he had worn for 13 years, the one that had kept his thoughts hidden and his mind safe from telepathic intrusion. His fingers found the clasp. "Do not," Constantine warned. "Whatever you are thinking, do not do it." Magnus opened the clasp and let the medallion fall. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. 13 years of carefully guarded thoughts, emotions, and memories flooded into Elara's consciousness like a dam breaking. She saw everything. His childhood before the massacre, bright and full of love. The terrible night when his uncle's forces struck, when he watched his parents die while he hid like coward because his mother made him promise to survive. The years of war and blood that followed, building his throne on foundation of sacrifice and ruthless necessity. And she saw his feelings for her. Not just attraction or gratitude, but something deeper. Love born from recognition of shared pain, trust built on foundation of tactical respect, need for the peace her presence brought after 13 years of isolation behind his mental shield. The flood of his consciousness gave her something she desperately needed. An anchor, a second mind to bear the weight she was carrying alone. "Use me," his thoughts whispered to hers. "I am here. I am yours. Take what you need." Elara seized the lifeline he offered. She did not just read his thoughts now. She merged with them, created a bridge between their consciousness that ran deeper than telepathy, stronger than any bond she had ever experienced. Through that bridge, his strength flowed into her, his alpha power, his will, his very life force channeling through their connection. Together they held the 60 soldiers frozen. Together they bore the impossible weight. Not one mind straining past breaking, but two minds supporting each other. And together, they turned their attention to Constantine. The general had seconds to realize his mistake, seconds to understand that he had not trapped a telepath. He had created the circumstances that forced the birth of something unprecedented, a permanent telepathic bond between a moonborn and an alpha king. Power beyond anything recorded in the histories. Elara did not kill him with her mind. She simply showed him the truth, forced him to feel everything his victims had felt. Every soldier who died in his coup, every innocent caught in his schemes, every moment of pain he had inflicted across decades of calculated cruelty. She made him experience it all simultaneously, the accumulated weight of his sins crushing down on his consciousness in a single instant. He was still screaming when Magnus's guards took him into custody. Elara collapsed the moment she released her hold on the soldiers' minds. Magnus caught her before she hit the ground, his arms cradling her while healers rushed forward. But even as her body failed, even as consciousness began to slip away, she could still feel him in her mind. That connection they had forged in desperation remained, a permanent bridge between their thoughts. The healers worked for 3 days, 3 days of fighting to keep her alive while her mind and body struggled to recover from catastrophic overextension. Magnus never left her side. Through their bond, she could feel him there, a steady presence in the darkness, anchor keeping her from drifting too far into oblivion. When she finally opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was his face, haggard with exhaustion and worry, but breaking into relief when their eyes met. "Welcome back," he said softly, his voice hoarse from days without proper rest. Elara tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Magnus held water to her lips, supporting her head while she drank. When she could finally form words, the first thing she said was, "I can still hear you, even without the medallion. The bond is permanent." "I know." His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. "I can hear you too. Your thoughts, your emotions, everything. We are connected now in ways I do not fully understand, but I am not sorry it happened. You should be." Elara's voice was weak but certain. "No more privacy, no more secrets. I will know every thought you have for the rest of your life." "Good." His smile was slight but genuine. No more walls, no more wondering if trust is real or performed. Just absolute honesty between us. That sounds far less terrifying than the alternative. Elara wanted to argue, to list all the reasons why this bond was dangerous and complicated and impossible. But through their connection, she felt his sincerity. He meant every word. He had chosen vulnerability over safety, chosen her over isolation. "What happened after I lost consciousness?" she asked. "We won." Magnus's expression hardened slightly. "Constantine is in custody, facing trial for treason and murder. The other territorial leaders are alive and grateful, though disturbed by what your abilities revealed about their own security vulnerabilities. Lady Seraphine's children have been rescued. She is being officially recognized as true ruler of the mountain territories. and you have become somewhat legendary, though I have been carefully limiting information about exactly what you can do. And the plot, the larger conspiracy? Broken, but not fully dismantled. Constantine had support throughout the region, sleeper agents and sympathizers who remain unidentified. But without his leadership, they are scattered and disorganized. It will take time to root them all out, but the immediate threat has passed. Elara closed her eyes, feeling the exhaustion that went bone deep. How long was I unconscious? 3 days. He paused, and she felt his worry through their bond. The healers say you permanently damaged something in your mind. Your telepathy is forever changed. You can control it now, choose when to read others, but using your full power will kill you eventually. Each time you link multiple minds or hold someone in thrall, you tear something that cannot fully heal. They estimate you have perhaps a dozen more uses of your maximum ability before the damage becomes fatal. So I am a weapon with limited ammunition. Elara opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze. That is oddly fitting. You are not a weapon. Magnus's voice carried intensity that resonated through their bond. You are a person who has been treated as weapon for too long, and I swear to you, I will never ask you to use your abilities beyond what is safe, even if it costs us tactical advantage. Your life is worth more than any victory. The words should have felt patronizing or controlling, but through their connection, Elara felt the absolute sincerity behind them. He meant it, would honor it, and that changed everything. What happens now? She asked quietly. We are bonded permanently. I can hear your thoughts and you can hear mine. How do we explain this to your council, to the other leaders? What does this mean for your expected political marriage? It means, Magnus said carefully, that I claim you as my mate before the council and the pack and anyone who questions it. You saved my life, saved all of the territorial leaders, created a bond that makes betrayal impossible and ensures complete honesty between ruler and advisor. Anyone who calls you unsuitable is a fool. Elara felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, but also fear. The council will resist. Your people will fear what we represent. Then they will learn to adapt. His hand tightened on hers. I spent 13 years hiding behind that medallion, terrified of vulnerability. That ends now. You are mine and I am yours. If the council cannot accept that, they can find a new king. The conviction in his voice, in his thoughts, left no room for doubt. He had made his choice. Now she had to make hers. I accept, she said quietly. Temporarily, until we are certain this bond is stable and not some artifact of extreme circumstances. His smile was small but genuine. Temporarily, I can work with that. They remained like that for a long time, hands joined, minds connected, both understanding that everything had changed. The game board had shifted, new powers had awakened, and whatever came next, they would face it together. Because sometimes the most unsuitable choice was the only one worth making. Sometimes trust was built not through certainty but through risk. And sometimes the strongest bonds were forged in the desperate moments when everything hung in the balance and you had to choose between safety and truth. Elara had spent 7 years running from connection, from belonging, from the risk of being hurt again. But lying in that bed, feeling Magnus's presence in her mind like a second heartbeat, she realized she was done running. Whatever dangers awaited, whatever enemies remained, whatever challenges the bond would bring, she would face them. Not alone. Never alone again. Together, they were stronger than either could be separately, and that simple truth would reshape the future of 6 territories and beyond. The Moonborn had returned. The Silent King had found his voice, and their enemies had no idea what was coming. Recovery took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of Elara learning to navigate a world fundamentally changed by the bond she shared with Magnus. Every morning she woke to his presence in her mind, a constant awareness of his thoughts and emotions that should have felt invasive, but instead brought profound peace. He was there, always there, a second consciousness intertwined with her own. And he felt her too, every fear, every hope, every moment of doubt or determination. There were no secrets between them now, no walls or careful performances. Just absolute transparency that was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The healers had been clear about her new limitations. She could still read other minds as she always had, could still filter and control that ability with newfound precision. but linking multiple minds or holding someone in telepathic thrall would tear something deep in her consciousness. She had perhaps a dozen more uses of her maximum power before the cumulative damage became fatal. It should have felt like a death sentence. Instead, it felt like clarity. She had been given specific number of moments when she could use her full abilities. The question was not whether to use them, but when they would matter most. The council meeting happened on the 16th day after the battle. Magnus summoned all 12 of his senior advisors to the Great Hall, along with representatives from the other 5 territories who had remained at his fortress in the aftermath of the conclave attack. Elara stood beside his throne, not behind it. Equal partner, not subordinate advisor. The positioning did not go unnoticed. Councillor Henrik was the first to speak, his thoughts broadcasting disapproval before his mouth opened. Your Majesty, while we are all grateful for Miss Ashford's service during the crisis, there are matters of protocol we must discuss. Specifically, your intentions regarding succession and the political marriages that have been proposed. Magnus's response was immediate and absolute. I claim Elara Ashford as my mate, my bond partner, and my queen. Before this council, before the gathered representatives of 6 territories, before any who would question it, she is mine and I am hers, bound by a telepathic connection that ensures absolute honesty and makes betrayal impossible. The hall erupted, protests and shocked exclamations from multiple advisors. Henrik's face turned red with fury. Lady Seraphine, seated with the other territorial representatives, smiled slightly. Through the bond, Elara felt Magnus's calm certainty beneath the chaos. This is unacceptable, Henrik declared, his voice rising above the din. The telepath is useful, yes, but she cannot be queen. Her gift is invasive and unnatural. The pack will never accept someone who can hear their every thought. You would destabilize the entire realm for a woman with no pack, no lineage, no political value. Magnus stood, and the weight of his alpha authority pressed down on the room like physical force. Every voice fell silent. She saved my life. She saved all of your lives. She created a bond with me that makes our rule stronger, not weaker, because it ensures I can never be manipulated or deceived. And she has proven herself in battle and strategy beyond what most of you could claim in a lifetime of service. But the precedent, another counselor began weakly, the precedent is broken. Magnus's voice carried finality that brooked no argument. I have spent 12 years proving myself worthy of this throne through strength and strategy. I do not need council permission to choose my mate. I inform you as courtesy, not to seek approval. The silence that followed was heavy with resentment and calculation. Elara could read their thoughts, the mixture of fear and pragmatic acceptance. They were afraid of what she represented, yes, but they were also realists. The attack on the conclave had demonstrated that old ways of thinking were no longer sufficient. Threats were evolving. Defenses needed to evolve as well. It was Colonel Helena who broke the stalemate. She rose from her seat, weathered face serious but not hostile. Her thoughts were clear and tactical as always. Your Majesty, I do not speak from sentiment, but from military pragmatism. The bond between you and Miss Ashford is unprecedented, yes, but it is also strategically invaluable. She can verify the honesty of every advisor, every ambassador, every potential threat. That level of intelligence gathering has no equal. And more importantly, she has proven her loyalty through action, not words. She nearly died protecting this kingdom. That earns respect, regardless of her origins. One by one, the other military commanders nodded agreement. Soldiers understood sacrifice in ways politicians never quite could. They had seen what Elara was willing to risk. That mattered more than bloodlines or protocols. Lady Seraphine stood next, her voice carrying across the hall. I withdraw any consideration as marriage candidate. It is clear where the king's heart lies. And having been freed from captivity because of Miss Ashford's intervention, I can personally attest to her value. She is worthy to stand beside him. The other territorial representatives followed suit, some with more grace than others, but all acknowledging the reality before them. The king had made his choice. The bond was permanent. Fighting it would accomplish nothing except creating unnecessary conflict. Henrik's thoughts simmered with resentment, but even he could read the room. He bowed stiffly. "The Council accepts your claim, Your Majesty, and we welcome your queen, though we reserve the right to advise caution in how her abilities are employed." Magnus's smile was slight and dangerous. "I would expect nothing less. Caution and wisdom are why I keep advisors. But the decision is made. Elara Ashford will be formally crowned as queen within the month." After the council dispersed, Elara found herself alone with Magnus in his private study. She could feel his satisfaction through their bond, but also his exhaustion. Confronting the council had cost him political capital that would take time to rebuild. "You did not have to fight them so hard," she said quietly. "We could have waited, let them adjust gradually to the idea." "No." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Waiting would have signaled that their approval mattered more than my choice. That would have undermined your position before you even took it. Better to establish the reality immediately and let them adapt on their own time." Through their bond, she felt the deeper truth beneath his words. He had spent 13 years being careful, being political, weighing every decision against potential consequences. The medallion had been symbol of that caution, that isolation. Removing it had been more than tactical choice in desperate moment. It had been decision to live differently, to choose connection over safety, love over strategy. "What happens now?" Elara asked. "We have a month before the coronation. A month for your enemies to plan, for resistance to build, for those who fear me to organize opposition. Now we build something new." Magnus moved to the window overlooking the training yards. Something that has never existed before. A sanctuary for wolves whose gifts make them outcasts. A place where telepaths, empaths, seers, anyone with abilities they cannot control, can learn to harness their power safely. You will lead it. Teach them what you have learned. Give them what no one gave you. The vision took shape in Elara's mind, pulled from his thoughts and her own hopes. A wing of the fortress dedicated to training gifted wolves. Not to create weapons, but to teach ethics and control. To prove that abilities like hers were not threats, but assets when properly understood and guided. It was ambitious. It was unprecedented. It was exactly what she had needed at 16 when her own pack cast her out in fear. "I will need help," she said. "Teachers who understand what these abilities feel like from the inside. Resources to find those who are suffering in isolation. Protection for students who will be vulnerable while they learn. You will have everything you need." Magnus turned to face her, and she saw the absolute commitment in his eyes and felt it even more clearly through their bond. This is not just political gesture or attempt to legitimize your position. This is necessary. The world is changing. Abilities that were once rare are becoming more common. If we do not teach the next generation to use their gifts responsibly, someone else will teach them to use them as weapons. The claiming ceremony took place under the full moon, as tradition demanded. The pack gathered in the great courtyard, hundreds of wolves in both human and animal forms bearing witness. Elara wore a gown of deep midnight blue that Lady Seraphine had commissioned, silver embroidery catching the moonlight in patterns that echoed ancient moonborn symbols. Magnus stood beside her in ceremonial furs and leather, the silver medallion conspicuously absent from his throat. He had locked it away in the royal vault with instructions that it never be worn again. A symbol of walls he would not rebuild. The pack's high priestess performed the ancient rites, blood and oaths, promises spoken aloud and echoed in the mental space only Elara and Magnus could share. The priestess bound their wrists together with silver cord, then cut their palms. Their blood mingled as they clasped hands, and the bond between them surged with new strength. "Do you accept this bond?" the priestess asked Elara. "Knowing it will bind you to him for all your days, that his joys will be yours and his sorrows will cut you as deeply as your own?" "I accept." Elara's voice was steady, and through their connection she felt Magnus's love wash over her in waves. "And you, Alpha King? Do you accept this bond, knowing she will hear your every thought, see your every weakness, possess power over your mind that no other can claim?" "I accept." Magnus's physical voice spoke simultaneously with his mental one, resonating through their connection. "I choose vulnerability. I choose trust. I choose her above all others." The priestess stepped back, and the pack howled their acceptance. The sound rose to the stars, primal and beautiful, acknowledging their new queen not through fear, but through recognition of strength proven in battle. But something else happened as the ritual completed, something unexpected. The bond shifted. It had been one-directional in that first desperate moment when Magnus removed his medallion, his thoughts flooding into Elara's consciousness. Then it had equalized somewhat during the 3 days of her recovery, becoming bilateral. But now, as the formal claiming concluded, it transformed again. Elara gasped as she felt the change. She could still hear Magnus's thoughts as clearly as her own, but now she could also feel the pack. Not their individual thoughts, but their collective presence. A network of consciousness that she was suddenly aware of in ways she had never experienced. She was not just bonded to Magnus. She was bonded through him to every wolf who had accepted her as queen. It was overwhelming but not painful, like standing at the center of a vast web, feeling the vibrations of every strand without being crushed by the weight. Magnus felt it too. Through their connection, she knew he experienced the same expansion of awareness. They were not just mates. They had become something unprecedented. A joined consciousness that could link to the pack in ways that had not existed since the original Moonborn walked the earth 3 centuries ago. The priestess saw the change in their expressions and smiled knowingly. The old powers return when they are needed most. The Moonborn were not destroyed, only sleeping, waiting for the moment when their gifts would be necessary again. That night, after the ceremony concluded and the celebrating pack finally dispersed to their homes, Magnus and Elara stood on the highest balcony of the fortress. The 6 territories spread below them, marked by distant lights and the knowledge that they had just changed the future of them all. "I can feel them," Elara said quietly. "Every wolf who accepted me tonight. Not their individual thoughts, but their presence. Like stars in a constellation I can sense but not quite touch." The old legends spoke of this. Magnus's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her close against the autumn chill. The Moonborn could link entire packs, create unity of purpose and understanding that prevented wars before they began. You are the first in 300 years to manifest that ability. That is why Constantine wanted you so desperately. With that power, he could have dominated every pack in the northern territories. But I would never use it that way. The thought of controlling so many minds made her sick. The bond we share works because it is mutual, because we both chose it. Forcing that connection on others would be violation, not leadership. Which is why you are worthy of it. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face gently. Power without wisdom is tyranny. You understand that in your bones, and you will teach it to every student who comes to your sanctuary. Our sanctuary, she corrected. This is not my project alone. We build it together. His smile was warm and genuine. Together. I am still learning to think in those terms. But with you, it feels natural. They stood in comfortable silence for a time, both processing the magnitude of what had happened. Then Magnus spoke again, his mental voice carrying weight his physical voice could not. "There is something I need to tell you, something I learned during the investigation of Constantine's network. Information about your bloodline." Elara tensed slightly, reading the concern in his thoughts. "What did you find?" Constantine had been searching for Moonborn survivors for years. He found records in old archives, histories that had been deliberately hidden or destroyed. Your father knew what you were before you were even born. Your grandmother was executed by a coalition of 5 kingdoms 3 decades ago because her abilities terrified them. That is why he exiled you at 16. Not because he was ashamed, but because keeping you in the pack would have eventually drawn the attention of those who had killed his mother. The revelation settled over Elara like a weight. Her entire exile had been protection disguised as punishment. Her father had carried the guilt of sending her away, had watched her leave knowing she would hate him, had done it anyway because the alternative was watching her die the same way his mother had. "Where is he now?" she asked quietly. "My father. Is he still alive?" "Yes." Magnus hesitated, then shared what he knew through their bond more efficiently than words. "He leads a small pack in the far eastern territories. He has been tracking your movements for years, never approaching but always ensuring you were safe. When word reached him about your role in stopping the Conclave attack, he sent a message requesting permission to attend your coronation." Elara felt tears prick her eyes. 7 years of anger and hurt, and now she understood. He had loved her enough to become the villain in her story, to let her hate him if it kept her alive. "I want to see him," she said, "before the coronation. I need to tell him I understand, that I forgive him for doing what needed to be done. I will arrange it." Magnus pulled her close, and she felt his support through their bond. "Whatever you need, it is yours." The meeting happened 3 days later in a private garden within the fortress walls. Elara saw her father before he saw her, and the sight nearly broke her. He had aged more than 7 years should account for. Gray streaked his dark hair heavily now, and new lines carved his face. The weight of guilt had marked him as surely as any physical scar. When he finally turned and saw her, his expression cycled through shock, joy, fear, and desperate hope in the span of seconds. His thoughts were chaos, everything he had rehearsed to say evaporating in the reality of her presence. "Elara," he said, and her name and his voice carried all the love and regret and longing of 7 years. She crossed the distance between them and embraced him, felt him stiffen in surprise before his arms came around her, holding her like he was afraid she would disappear if he let go. "I know why you did it," she said quietly into his shoulder. "I know about grandmother, about the coalition that executed her, about the danger I would have brought to the pack if I had stayed." Her father made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "I thought you would hate me forever. I prayed every day that you were safe, but I never thought you would understand, never thought I would have the chance to explain." Elara pulled back enough to look at him. She reached out with her telepathy, finally reading his mind without barriers. What she found was exactly what she had needed to see 7 years ago. Absolute love, terrible sacrifice, the knowledge that sending her away had destroyed part of him, but keeping her would have destroyed her. "You saved me," she said. "By sending me away, you gave me the chance to learn to control my abilities, to become strong enough to survive in a world that fears what I can do. I was angry for so long, but I understand now, and I forgive you." Her father's tears fell freely then. He had spent 7 years carrying guilt like a stone, and she had just lifted it away. They spent hours in that garden, sharing stories of the years apart. He told her about the nights he woke from nightmares of her suffering alone. She told him about the military work, about Magnus, about the battle that had revealed her full moonborn heritage. When Magnus joined them as the sun began its descent, her father studied him with the careful assessment of a man evaluating the one who would stand beside his daughter for life. "You removed your protection to save her," he said. It was not a question. His telepathic gift may be weak, but he could sense the bond between them. That took courage, or madness. I am not certain which. "Both," Magnus replied with slight smile. "But I would do it again without hesitation. Your daughter is worth more than any shield or safety I could hide behind." Her father nodded slowly. Then he looked at Elara with expression of profound relief. "You found what I hoped you would find, not just survival, but belonging, a place where your gift is valued rather than feared, a partner who sees your strength rather than just your power." The coronation took place 4 weeks after the conclave battle. Representatives from all 6 territories attended, along with emissaries from neighboring kingdoms who had heard the rumors of a telepathic queen and wanted to assess the threat or opportunity she represented. Elara wore a gown of silver and midnight blue, her dark hair woven with threads of precious metal that caught the light like starlight. The crown they placed on her head was ancient, recovered from moonborn ruins, and restored specifically for this occasion. It was delicate but strong, silver worked into patterns that suggested neural pathways and interconnected thoughts. Magnus stood beside her throughout the ceremony, their hands joined, their minds linked. When the priestess declared her queen before the assembled witnesses, the pack's howl of acceptance was genuine. She had proven herself through action, had saved their king and their way of life. That earned respect that no amount of political maneuvering ever could. But the moment that mattered most to Elara came after the formal ceremony concluded. The dedication of the Eastern Wing as the sanctuary for gifted wolves. 7 students stood in the courtyard, their ages ranging from 14 to 26. All of them carried abilities that had made them outcasts in their home packs, telepaths like Elara, empaths who felt others' emotions as their own. A young man with precognitive dreams he could not control. A woman whose touch could heal or harm depending on her emotional state. All of them had been found and brought here, offered sanctuary and training, and the promise that they would not be punished for gifts they had been born with. The youngest was a girl named Lyra, 14 years old, with the terrified eyes of someone drowning in voices she could not silence. Her thoughts were chaos, overwhelmed by the mental noise of everyone around her. Elara knelt before her, bringing herself to the girl's eye level. "I know what you are experiencing." Every thought pressing in, no way to make it stop, feeling like you are going insane from the constant invasion. Lyra's eyes widened. "You truly understand? You have felt this?" "For 23 years, until I learned control. And that is what I'm going to teach you. Not to suppress your gift or fear it, but to master it. To build walls in your mind that let you choose which thoughts to hear and which to filter out. To transform this curse into something you command rather than something that commands you." Over the following months, Elara worked with each student individually, taught them the mental disciplines she had developed through desperate necessity, showed them how to visualize shields and filters, how to distinguish their own thoughts from those of others, how to protect their consciousness while still using their gifts effectively. It was exhausting work, both mentally and emotionally. Each student carried trauma from years of being treated as dangerous or defective. Elara had to teach them not just control, but self-worth, had to convince them that their abilities were not flaws, but simply parts of who they were that needed understanding and training. Magnus supported the work in every way he could. He sat in on training sessions when his duties allowed, learning alongside the students. His presence provided the same anchor for them that it did for Elara, that blessed silence in the center of mental chaos. Students learned to associate his presence with safety and peace. In the evenings, Elara and Magnus would stand on their balcony and discuss the day's progress. The sanctuary was working. Students were gaining control. But more importantly, they were gaining hope. 6 months after the coronation, news arrived from the Eastern Reach that changed everything. An ambassador appeared at the fortress gates with ancient documents and a request for immediate audience with the Queen. Ambassador Lycan was elderly, 70 years old, with the bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime guarding secrets. He spread the documents across the table in Magnus's study, his weathered hands careful with the fragile parchment. "These were hidden in our deepest archives," he explained, "records of the moon-born civilization from 300 years ago. We knew they existed but believed them lost in the Purge. It took 6 months of searching to find them." "What do they say?" Magnus asked, leaning forward to study the ancient script. The ambassador's expression was grave. "They tell the truth about the Moonborn and why they were destroyed. It was not just fear of their power, it was what their power revealed." Elara felt ice form in her chest. Revealed about what? The ambassador met her eyes directly. The Moonborn could not just read thoughts and link minds. At their peak, the most powerful among them could see genetic heritage, could identify bloodlines with absolute certainty. And 300 years ago, they discovered something that 5 kingdoms wanted desperately to hide. "What?" Magnus's voice was sharp. "That the royal bloodlines were not as pure as claimed, that half the ruling families had common blood, that claims of divine right were fiction created to maintain power, that the entire hierarchy was built on lies." The Moonborn threatened to reveal this truth, to create forced transparency that would have destroyed the political order. So the 5 kingdoms conspired to eliminate them before that could happen. The weight of that revelation settled over the room. The Moonborn had not been destroyed because they were dangerous. They had been destroyed because they could not be lied to, because they represented the ultimate threat to those who ruled through deception and manufactured legitimacy. The ambassador continued, his voice heavy. "There is more. The prophecy that was recorded just before the Purge. It states that when a Moonborn returns and bonds with a true king, they will either unite all packs under just rule or dominate them through force. The choice between salvation and tyranny rests in their hands." Elara felt Magnus's alarm through their bond before she consciously processed the words herself. The prophecy was not blessing. It was warning. She had the power to either heal or destroy on a scale that had not been seen in 3 centuries. And apparently, history suggested the Moonborn were just as capable of choosing domination as salvation. That night, Elara stood alone on the balcony, staring at the stars and wrestling with the weight of what she had learned. She felt Magnus approaching through their bond before she heard his footsteps. "You are afraid," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Afraid that the prophecy means you could become tyrant despite your intentions. Everyone claims they would use power responsibly." Elara kept her gaze on the stars. "But power changes people. The Moonborn 300 years ago probably believed they were doing the right thing when they threatened to expose the royal bloodlines. They probably thought forced transparency would create a better world. But they were using their gifts to control information, to shape society according to their vision. That is tyranny, even if it is well-intentioned. "So what do we do?" Magnus asked. "Knowing that you have this potential, this choice before you, we build safeguards." Elara finally turned to face him. "The Sunderstone that we recovered from the Moonborn ruins. The one Constantine could have used to sever his telepathic abilities. I want it displayed in the throne room. Visible reminder that if I ever abuse my power, if I ever cross the line from protection to domination, you have the means to stop me." Magnus's thoughts resonated with understanding through their bond. "You want me to hold the weapon that could end your abilities, to be your check against corruption. I trust you to use it if necessary." She took his hand. "That is what love means. Not just supporting each other, but being willing to stop each other when support becomes enabling. And if I become corrupted, if power changes me instead of you, then I use my abilities to ensure you cannot harm others, even if it costs me my life. We protect each other and the people we serve. That is the responsibility that comes with power." Magnus pulled her close, and she felt his love and respect through their connection. "You are already choosing salvation over domination by building these limits, by teaching ethics alongside power, by making yourself vulnerable to accountability. Time would tell if it was enough, but for now, in this moment, they had each other and they had a plan. The Moonborn had returned, but she would not repeat the mistakes of her ancestors. 2 years passed. The sanctuary grew from 7 students to 50. Young wolves with abilities they could not control found their way to the fortress, drawn by rumors of a queen who understood their struggles. Elara taught them all the same lesson. Power without ethics was tyranny, regardless of how well-intentioned. Some of the students struggled more than others. A young empath named Thomas became so overwhelmed by feeling others' pain that he tried to use his abilities to force people to be happy. Elara had to intervene, to show him that manipulating emotions was violation, even if the intention was kind. He learned. They all learned. But the lessons were hard. The Sunderstone remained in the throne room, mounted on a pedestal where everyone could see it. Elara made a point of touching it once a week, reminding herself that her power was not unlimited, that accountability mattered more than capability. Magnus ruled with the wisdom that came from having absolute honesty with his partner. Through their bond, Elara could verify the intentions of every advisor, every ambassador, every potential threat. But she was careful never to use that information to control, only to inform. The decisions remained Magnus's to make. And then, in the spring of their 3rd year together, Elara discovered she was pregnant. The news came from the healers, though she had suspected for weeks. Through the bond, she felt Magnus's reaction in real time. Terror and joy in equal measure, wonder at creating new life, fear of what abilities their children might inherit. Moonborn bloodline combined with Alpha King heritage. The potential was staggering and frightening. The twins were born on the winter solstice, a boy they named Alaric and a girl they named Liana. From the moment of their birth, Elara could feel their consciousness. Already aware, already attempting to communicate telepathically. They were powerful in ways even she had not been as an infant. The first year was exhausting and terrifying. Trying to parent children who could read your every thought, who cried not just from hunger or discomfort, but from sensing the stress and worry of everyone around them. There was no hiding anything from telepathic infants, but there was also beauty in it. The absolute honesty of loving children who knew you completely, who could feel your love as certainly as they felt your exhaustion, who grew up understanding from their first moments that thoughts and actions did not always align, that internal struggle was normal and human. By their 2nd year, the twins were speaking in both words and mental communication. By their 3rd year, they were beginning to manifest abilities that went beyond even Elara's. Alaric could not just read minds, but sense the emotional history of objects, reading the echoes of past events. Liana could link minds, not just one at a time, but in small networks, creating shared consciousness among groups. They were going to be more powerful than their mother. The question was whether they would be wiser. Elara began their ethics training early. Before teaching them to expand their abilities, she taught them restraint. Before showing them what they could do, she taught them what they should not do. Power without wisdom, she told them over and over, was the path to tyranny. Magnus taught them differently but with the same goal. He showed them the weight of command through letting them sit in on council meetings, let them feel the difficulty of making decisions when every choice had costs, taught them that leadership meant serving those who depended on you, not controlling them. 10 years after Elara's coronation, the sanctuary had trained over 200 students. Some returned to their home packs, bringing understanding of gifted wolves to regions that had feared them. Others stayed and became teachers themselves, passing on the ethics and techniques they had learned. The 6 territories had entered an unprecedented period of peace, not because there were no conflicts, but because Elara could identify threats before they escalated, could verify the honesty of negotiations and treaties, could sense when communication was breaking down and needed intervention. She used her abilities carefully, always mindful of the line between protection and control. The Sunderstone remained in the throne room, a reminder of her limitations and her willingness to be held accountable. Ambassador Lycan returned when the twins were 10 years old. He brought more ancient documents, more pieces of the Moonborn history that had been hidden or lost. "There is something you need to know," he said, spreading the latest findings across the table. About the original Moonborn and why some of them chose domination over cooperation. Elara leaned forward, Magnus beside her with their children present at her insistence. They were old enough to understand this history, old enough to learn from it. The ambassador's finger traced ancient text. The Moonborn who became tyrants did not start with that intention. They began with the same goals you have: peace, understanding, prevention of war through forced empathy. But they discovered that people would lie to themselves as much as they lied to others. That even when shown the truth, humans and wolves alike would choose comfortable fiction over difficult reality. So they started forcing truth, making people confront their own hypocrisies and failures. And that force, that violation of mental autonomy, even for good purpose, was the first step toward tyranny. The lesson was clear. The road to domination was paved with good intentions, with the belief that you knew better than others what they needed, with the arrogance of thinking your power gave you the right to override their choices. Elara looked at her children, seeing them process the information with their advanced understanding. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked them. "Why we keep the Sunderstone visible? Why I teach ethics before power?" Alaric answered first, his young voice serious. "Because being able to control minds does not mean we should. Because people have the right to be wrong, to learn from their own mistakes, even if we could prevent those mistakes. And because power without restraint turns into oppression," Liana added, "even if we think we are helping, even if our intentions are good. The moment we start making choices for others instead of with others, we become tyrants." Magnus's pride resonated through the bond Elara shared with him. Their children understood, not just intellectually, but in their bones. The lessons were taking root. That evening, after the children were asleep and the fortress had quieted for the night, Elara and Magnus stood on their balcony as they had done countless times over the years. Below them, the territories stretched into darkness, marked by lights from settlements and cities. Above them, stars wheeled in their eternal patterns. "We did it," Magnus said quietly. "Built something that might outlast us. The sanctuary, the peace between territories. Children who understand power comes with responsibility. We built it together." Elara leaned against him, feeling his warmth and his presence in her mind. "Neither of us could have done this alone. Do you ever regret it? The bond, the loss of privacy, the weight of being queen? Never." She turned to face him, their eyes meeting in the starlight. "You gave me what I needed most. Not silence from other minds, but a mind I could trust absolutely. Partnership built on truth rather than performance. That is worth more than any privacy or peace I gave up." He kissed her then, gentle and deep, and through their connection, she felt his love as certainly as she felt her own heartbeat. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would always be threats to manage, students to train, decisions to make about when to use her abilities and when to hold back. The prophecy remained unfulfilled, the choice between salvation and domination still hanging in the balance. But tonight, standing on this balcony with her mate beside her and their children sleeping safely, Elara allowed herself to feel hope. Not naive hope that everything would work out perfectly, but hard-won hope earned through struggle and sacrifice. The hope that came from knowing you had built something good, something that mattered, something worth protecting. The voices in her head had never gone silent. She still heard the thoughts of everyone around her, still felt the constant press of consciousness against her own. But she had learned that the goal was never silence. The goal was finding the right voices to fill the space, the thoughts that brought comfort rather than chaos, the minds that made her stronger rather than drowning her in noise. And in Magnus's presence, in their bond, in the students she trained and the children she raised, Elara had found exactly that, not silence but harmony, not emptiness but the beautiful, chaotic, honest noise of home. 20 years after her coronation, Elara stood before the sanctuary's newest students and began as she always did. My name is Queen Elara, and I am a telepath. For 23 years, I believed my gift was a curse, something that isolated me, that made me a danger to those around me. I spent 7 years running from connection, from belonging, from the risk of being hurt again. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the frightened faces before her. But I was wrong. My gift was never the curse. The curse was not understanding it, not having anyone to teach me control and ethics. That is why this sanctuary exists, to give you what I did not have, to teach you that your abilities are not flaws, but simply parts of who you are that need training and understanding. A young boy raised his hand, no more than 15, his thoughts broadcasting desperate hope. Can you really teach us to control it? To not be afraid anymore? Elara smiled, remembering when she had asked the same question. I can teach you to master your gift instead of being mastered by it. I can show you how to build walls in your mind that let you choose what you hear. I can prove to you that being different is not the same as being broken. But you have to do the work. You have to practice the disciplines, even when they are hard, even when you are tired or frustrated or want to give up. She could see the moment they chose to believe her, the shift from despair to determination in their eyes and in their thoughts. It was why she continued teaching despite all her other responsibilities, because this moment, this choice to hope, was the beginning of everything. That evening, as had become tradition, the entire family gathered in the private dining hall. Elara and Magnus, Alaric and Liana, now joined by Colonel Helena, who had become honorary grandmother, and Elara's father, who had moved to the fortress to be close to his daughter and grandchildren. They shared the meal and stories of the day. Alaric described his work helping younger students control their abilities. Liana talked about the diplomatic mission she would be undertaking next month, using her networking abilities to help negotiate a trade dispute between two minor territories. Normal family conversation, except that half of it happened telepathically and the other half in spoken words. Elara watched them and felt profound gratitude for the family she had found, for the purpose she had discovered, for the man who had chosen to trust her when trust should have been impossible. After dinner, as the others dispersed to their evening activities, Magnus took her hand and led her to the throne room. The Sunderstone still sat on its pedestal, unchanged after all these years. "Have you ever been tempted?" he asked, "to use your abilities beyond the limits we set? To control rather than advise?" "Every day." Elara did not hesitate with her answer. "Every time I see someone making a mistake I could prevent. Every time I sense a conflict I could resolve by forcing empathy and understanding. The temptation is constant. But you do not give in, because the moment I start making choices for others, I stop being protector and become tyrant." She touched the Sunderstone lightly. "And because I trust you to use this if I ever cross that line, that accountability matters more than any power I possess." Magnus pulled her close, and their bond resonated with shared understanding. After 20 years, they had learned to navigate the absolute transparency of their connection, had discovered that trust was not about hiding weakness, but about being known completely and loved anyway. "The measure of civilization," Elara said quietly, quoting the ancient moonborn text they had discovered years ago, "is not power to control, but wisdom to choose restraint. And you have chosen wisely, every day, for 20 years. Magnus's voice carried pride and love in equal measure. "Our children will choose wisely because of what we have taught them. The sanctuary students will choose wisely because of what you have shown them. That is your legacy. Not power, but wisdom passed forward." They stood in silence for a time, surrounded by the symbols of their rule. the thrones they sat on to make judgments, the maps marking territories they protected, the sunderstone that limited their power, all of it representing the balance they had struck between capability and restraint. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new tests of their wisdom and resolve, but tomorrow had always brought such things. The question was never whether challenges would come. The question was whether you had built something strong enough to withstand them. Elara looked at Magnus and knew with absolute certainty that what they had built together would endure. Not forever, because nothing was forever, but long enough to matter, long enough to change the future for gifted wolves who would no longer have to choose between isolation and persecution. Long enough for her children to build their own legacies, their own choices, their own balance between power and responsibility. The voices in her head whispered their constant chorus, the thoughts of guards on night watch and servants cleaning the halls and students practicing their lessons and her children dreaming in their beds. The beautiful, chaotic noise of life and consciousness and connection. For 23 years she had wanted silence. For the next 40 years she would choose to listen, to hear the voices that needed to be heard, to offer guidance to those who sought it, to protect those who could not protect themselves, not because she had to, not because destiny demanded it, but because she had learned that power was not about what you could take or control, it was about what you chose to give. And standing here beside Magnus, surrounded by the pack she had sworn to serve, Elara chose to give everything. Her gifts, her wisdom, her strength, all of it offered in service of something larger than herself. That was the difference between salvation and domination, between power that healed and power that harmed. Not the ability itself, but the choice of how to wield it. The Moonborn had returned. The prophecy remained open, the future unwritten. But Elara knew which path she would walk, had known it from the moment Magnus removed his medallion and trusted her with his unguarded thoughts. The path of wisdom over power, of restraint over control, of partnership over domination. And as the moon rose high above the fortress, casting silver light across the territory she protected, Queen Elara Ashford, the last and first of the Moonborn, smiled, because she had finally learned what it meant to come home. Not to a place, but to a purpose. Not to silence, but to the right voices. Not to isolation, but to connection built on absolute trust. And that was worth everything she had suffered to find it. The end.